Welcome back, and what we're going to do here is we're going to go through the weighting process, which can be kind of complex depending on the complexity of the model and the rig that you're using. So right now we're just starting off with the same object and rigging setup that we left off of in the last video, and you can see here that it bends pretty well. There's some weird things going on where it kind of pushes it up, but you can always eliminate that by moving things down as well as rotating them at the same time. Lots of different ways you can play around with those, but this is just the basics. So let's take a look at how this works. The weighting process is basically how each vertex of this object is attached to each of the joints. So when I move this joint, if I move it, you can see it affects these vertices quite a bit, and it doesn't affect these at all. They stay right where they are. In fact, these over here, even though they moved up, they aren't being affected by that specific joint. They are being affected by these joints, which are being affected by that one. So let's take a look at what this looks like in a visual form. I'm going to undo that so we can go back to the original. And what we want to do first is select just the mesh. So go to the mesh, then go up here to skin, and we're going to go down to paint skin weights and choose the option box for this. Now what you see here is this is the tool settings window for the paint skin weights. I'm going to move it up a little bit so you can see more of it. And you can see each of the joints along the path here are named. This is really important that you name your joints so that you don't end up with just joint 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because if you're doing a character, you could have well over 50 joints for a pretty basic character. So you don't want to have to go through and guess which each of these is going to be. So let's just go look at that real quick. In fact, since I forgot to do that, I'm going to hit Q to get out of that, and I'm going to select my joints and select the first one, go up to the channel box so we can turn this into a specific name. So maybe we call this joint just to keep them all together in the same area if you have to look for them in a list. So I'll call this one joint, and I'll call it the box, and this could be begin. And then of course joint box, and I'll call this one begin 01, joint box middle, joint box middle one. I have a very bad naming procedure here. And I'm going to call this one joint box, and we'll give it something like end 01, O2, or very end. Now, obviously, my naming convention doesn't really make sense, but I just wanted to show you the importance of naming them and how you should name them. You should name them with not only terms that describe what they do and where they are, but also name them in a way that keeps them together in a list. So if I had to go up to a window or a list of information, I could open this up in the outliner and see all the joints kind of make sense. They're placed in the same order here, and I can select them by name. So if you're doing a character or something like that, you'd probably name them something that makes a little bit more sense. So it could be something like character name, maybe it's Joe, and then joint and leg, left, and thigh, or something like that. So you know exactly which one's for the thigh, which one's for the knee, which one's for the ankle, and you know if it's on the left side or the right side. You also know which character it belongs to in case you have multiple characters in your scene. So the naming convention is pretty important. So let's go ahead. Now that we've got some names, you've seen that process. Let's go on to skin and go down to paint, skin weights, and option box. So there's really not a whole lot we need to do with this one because it's very simple, but I do want to show you how it works. So here we have our new names, so we get an idea which joint is and where it's located on the object. What you see when I select one, say this middle one here, you'll notice the grayscale. So wherever you see it's 100% or close to 100% white, that means that those vertices are affected 100% or close to it by that specific joint that you have selected. Anything that is completely black is not being affected by that particular joint, and everything in between the grayscale is a variant of that amount. So you can see everything that is between the really white to really dark is going to just be affected a little bit at a time. And that's where you get your curve. If it went straight from black to white, then there would be no curve in the mesh when you bend the joints. It would just immediately change. So that's where you have to get used to seeing how that works. So let's see what can happen. Now, I'm going to just go back in here and we'll bend this joint to see what it looks like. So there you can see the vertices just forward of that joint are 100% affected by the movement of that joint. The ones after that slowly dissipate out until there's no participation by those vertices at all. So I'm going to undo that, go back to the mesh, and let's just bring open that paint skin weights again. So with that object selected, you can kind of see how that looks in the black and white. Now, to control this in the paint skin weights tool here, you can see that we're given a paintbrush first of all, and here are the different profiles of the shape. If you want to change the diameter of it in the scene, you can hold B for brush and then left click and drag to increase or decrease the diameter. Down back into the window here, you can see the things that are most important are the paint operation, whether you're using replace, add, scale, or smooth. Normally you'll use replace or add. And then the other two things here are the opacity, which is how much it's going to affect that vertex when you click and drag your paintbrush over it, and value, which is either going increase in the value will make it more affected, so it'll go brighter all the way to white, or decrease in the value will take it down to darker, so it's less affected by the joint, or completely unaffected by it by going all the way to black. So let's see, if we want to take out, let's say we want to take out some of these that are now kind of grayscale. I'm going to change the paint operation to replace. I'm going to use an opacity of 1, or let's just go 0.5, so it's about half, and then a value of 0. And I'm going to click and drag. Now, in order to affect it, you have to drag over the vertices. So I'm going to start back here, and as I'm clicking and dragging, you see it getting darker in those areas, and it's only getting darker by about 50% at a time. It's not going full black right off the bat, just a little bit. So it gives me a little bit of flexibility. Okay. Now you can see there's much less space here where it converts from black to white. Likewise, if I go back and I change my value to full white and I click and drag in this area, it's increasing those vertices to full white as well. So let's go ahead, I'm going to close that, hit Q, and let's see how that affects the way the skin moves. So I'm going to select that middle joint and hit E to rotate, and now you can see how there's very little bend. It's almost a very sharp movement rather than a nice smooth movement that we had before. In fact, if I move this joint around a little bit, we can really scrunch it up so it's an immediate change. I have a little bend over here. You can see how the mesh kind of curves right here. That means that that vertex is not completely painted to that joint the way the one over here is, or the ones that are on either side. So I would need to go back to my skin weights and paint over that vertex to give it more 100% effect to that particular joint. So I'm going to undo that movement. Now, there's some other ways that we can go about skinning, and that involves putting actual numbers to the vertices rather than just painting over them. Okay, so the way this works is it gives you a very defined way of determining how the mesh is rigged to the skin. And as you saw when we were painting, we missed a vertex where it didn't quite take the same way the vertices around it did, so it left kind of a bump in the mesh. And so you'll come across this quite a bit, especially when you're using the Paint Skin Weights tool, because it's not 100% accurate, and it's hard to tell what's 100% white and what is just 99% white. So let's take a look at this. Each vertex is mapped to a specific joint. So we'll start off by just selecting a specific set of vertices. So let's go to vertex mode, and let's select the vertices that are right around this particular joint, the end, or the middle joint 02, I believe. And as you can see, instead of selecting the vertices, it selected the joints, which is a default value. It's always looking for joints before anything else. So let's go up here to this filter menu. If it's hidden, it would look something like this right before the magnets. And the second button in are your joints. So I'm going to deselect the joints, and that way we can select things other than the joints. So let's go back again. I'm going to select the ones that go right around that third to the last joint. And let's bring up the component editor. So we go to Windows, General Editor, and go down to Component Editor. And in the component editor, you'll see here we have some tabs across the top, and I'm in the Smooth Skins tab. So we've created the skin to the joints using Smooth Skins, and what it does is it shows on the left side each vertex that I have selected, so you can see vertex and then the number of them, and then across the top you can see all the different joints that each of those vertices have some affiliation with. So you can see here that they're pretty low values, like some of them are 0.005, some of them are a little higher, like down here where it's 0.7. We're getting closer to the actual joint that they're attached to. Some of them are 0.001, and so on. They all add up to a total of 1. So each vertex has to have at least a small part of it attached to one of these joints in order for it to affect, but it can't equal more than 1. So here we can see the names of the joints, and if I spread this out, we can read them a little bit better. So there's the middle one, there's the second middle one, and I think that's the one I'm going to do here. So let's just say we want to get rid of, we want to take these vertices and make them completely unaffected by this middle one joint. So what you can do is click, I'll click in the space right above the first number, so left click and drag through to highlight them, and then just hit 0 on the keyboard and hit enter. And it takes all of those vertices to 0, which in turn completely eliminates that joint from our list, because now they are no longer affected by that at all. If we want to get rid of the others, let's say the end, let's go ahead and do the same thing here. Say 0. Let's say for the box end, the very last joint, let's make them 0.5. it turns all of these 0.5 and it adjusts all of these so that the total value is still set to 1. Alright, let's go ahead and get rid of these as well. So go 0. And I'm going to close this, and let's take a look at what we just did. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to turn on my joints up here in the filter menu again. And let's select that particular joint. You can see what happened here. These vertices are affected by that joint by the same amount. So there is no bend in the mesh at all anymore. So let's undo that. Let's try the one after that. Now you can see that these are completely affected by that joint right there. Let's say that we want all of these at the top to be affected 100% by this joint over here. So I'm going to go back. Let's deselect the joint. I'll select all of these. Let's go back to Windows, General, Component Editor. And we want it to be affected by, let's say, the third to the last one, which would be middle 01, which would be this one right here. So we can click and drag through all of those vertices and let's put 1 and enter. So you can see, because we made it 100% attached to that particular joint, it got rid of all of the other joints. So let's see what happens when we move that joint. So we'll go back up here to the filter, turn on joints, let's select that particular one, and there you go. Everything moves with that joint. There's no change, bend, or anything. It's 100% affected by that joint. So this would be something like if you had, let's say, a character and you were rotating the neck joint and the face started to bend and warp. You would want to place all of the vertices on that face or on that head of that character on that one joint for the neck, so that when you rotate the neck, all the vertices on that head rotate properly and they don't change the proportions. Alright, so that's it for this video. This is a quick one on just how to weight the skin to the joints and a couple different ways to adjust those.